Hey guys, it's Jason, Mike from the Full Quadrant podcast today. Today is episode 5.
Are you sure?
I'm sure excited to be with you for this exciting podcast.
Yep. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Jason, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, good to talk to you too,
Yeah,
Mike.
it's exciting stuff. It's something that everybody does, right? And I definitely do both luring and shaping.
Yep.
And
There are benefits,
just
and
the benefits, the drawbacks of some.
I like to call them limitations. It's because it's not like you ruin yourself by doing one thing or the other all the time, but like there are limitations, I think.
Well, it depends. Think about like con,
I guess, yeah,
right?
you're right. Yeah, that's not a
The
fully
drawback is the dog that it's always like creative and trying to figure stuff out, and it can be a pain, right?
yeah,
If you can't handle a dog like that,
yeah, that's true. That's a
because
good point.
they're always trying to figure stuff. They're not waiting for you to tell them what to do. They're just out doing stuff.
I agree.
Yeah, we're trying to decide what to talk about, and you came up with a really good topic that a lot of people are involved with or have feelings about, right?
Yeah, it's a very tribal, a very charged conversation because there are primarily two camps. If you see a very large gathering of people that follow a specific style of training or an individual trainer, usually they fall into one camp or the other of the two camps that we're talking about today, which are we're going to talk about luring versus shaping. And we're not talking about this because there haven't been 100 other episodes or podcasts about this, but it's because usually each of those podcasts or episodes falls into one camp. They fall into one biased camp where they're promoting one over the other, or they're saying one is, the right way, and the other way is there's just it's just,
Yeah,
useless, right?
but it goes to why, like everything we talk about, why limit yourself to one thing, right? You can have a preference of what you want to do, but you need to know how things work. Like, how does shaping work? How does luring work? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? When should you use one? When should you not use that one?
Right.
And when should you switch to the other? But when you limit yourself and say, well, this is bad, so I'm only going to do luring, or luring is bad, so I'm only going to do shaping. Hey, stop. So then it's when you come across a dog, when you limit yourself, that means you're not doing the optimal training for that dog in front of you, right? You need to have everything in your toolbox, know how to do them, know how to use them. And then when the dog comes in front of you, then you pick and choose the optimal training for that dog.
Right.
Right.
And there are, like you said, there are benefits to both camps, to both luring or shaping. There are benefits to both.
One of the benefits and disadvantages of shaping is just that with
He's too
Khan
creative.
when he's creative,
Yeah. So
which is, yeah,
before we dive into like the lecture of and conversation of luring, shaping, the definitions, the pros and cons, the secret sauce of each, I'm just curious on your opinion. Why are there even camps? Because if it's clear that both have their benefits, right? Why are there camps of people that put their tent in one side and neglect, even they turn an eye to the benefits of the other? Why are they so
right.
entrenched in
It's
one being the right way?
it's the how they feel. It's their personal opinion, right? The They feel a certain way about the dog, and they believe that one way is correct and the other way isn't, according to the dog. The problem is this:
But
nobody can have a dog.
what told them in their experience
Nobody can have a
what
dog.
told them in their experience that that there's only one right way? What told them that there was only one right way?
Well,
Is it
a
their
lot of
style?
times
Is it
it's
like
who
where
they
they
learn.
learned?
A lot of times it's who they learned from.
Yeah.
You know, it comes to, because I remember when I first started training, and I think this is probably a majority of people, I believe that that person that I was learning from, that they were like the know-all, see-all.
Yeah.
And that was over 14 years ago, or about 14 years ago. And I was like, why go look anywhere else? This person knows everything, because my knowledge was limited. And then when your knowledge is limited, then what you see the other person doing, you know, it seems like, wow, they know a lot. But when you start going outside and learning other things, then you realize, okay, yes, that person knew a bunch, but their knowledge was limited, you know, or because they were stuck in the way they learned when they were, you know, starting out and never explored anything else, right? They don't know different ways of training.
So in short, I mean, it's hard for people to feel comfortable thinking for themselves. They continue to draw from maybe their first positive influence in dog training or their first positive mentor or instructor, um, in learning this art, which it's art, it's scientific, but it's also artistic creativity. And it's hard for people to open their mind to the fact that what what their first exposure into dog training was might not be the only exposure or might not be the only thing.
Yeah, but also when you've been doing it for a long time and then someone comes along and kind of says, hey, the way you've been doing it is not the best way, right? Or there's another way to do what you're doing. It's difficult to change. Plus, because if you're successful with what you do, turning your training around and trying something different is, you know, it's difficult to do, right? Now you have to change, because a lot of times it's about, you know, how to do a certain training style, and because you lay a foundation for that training style, right? And
Right.
foundation leads to how you train later. So if you can't just incorporate the new thing into your finished dog, you kind of have to lay the foundation to get to the optimal way of training in
Right.
that new style, right?
Yeah. So
But it's
and I mean, it's detrimental. Like our industry, as an unregulated industry, there's a, I mean, I mean, it's natural for there to be camps. There's camps in politics, there's camps in sports, there's camps in, you know, social circles. Like it's natural for human beings to want to group with like-minded individuals because it serves their existential purposes, right? But in this regard, it actually creates fractures in the overall direction that most good dog trainers, honest to heart, good dog trainers, the direction they want to move forward with training, with dogs, with everything involved in that. It's definitely it presents itself as a roadblock when you fall into camps and you start promoting those
yeah.
one-sided only conversations, or you know, you discredit others because they're not the same as you. It makes for great clickbait, it makes for great marketing schematics and strategy.
And that's and also I see trainers all the time online,
Yeah.
right? And they're not talking about what they do, they're talking about how what somebody else does is bad. And
Right.
like, oh, I don't do that, I don't
Right.
do this, I don't do this. And that's why I think if you've listened to other gold students, graduates, right, the one thing that everybody says is, and what Bart says is, if the dog looks good, right, and it performs, then whatever they did was correct.
Yeah. At the end of the
It
day,
didn't matter how they got there.
let the dog be the thing that we judge, right? And sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, that's the one thing I liked about Bart is he's like, you can train any way you want, And that's where NePoPo comes in, right? You're
Very
the architect of your
open-minded,
own system.
very open-minded. Which is contradictory to the opinion that is held about the system, is that the system is very like rooted in like it's a tool-based system, it's an e-collar system only, or it's a quadrant system only, or it's a food training or clicker training only, right? Like it's there are a lot of misconceptions about it. So unless you've gone through the school, which I recommend you do, like keep your mind open. And let me quote from Ted Lasso, because I'm on a rewatching binge of that series. But I like where he says, be less judgmental and be more curious, right? And I
Yeah.
think you can't, make it, or you should not make a statement about something you don't understand without having gone through the school yourself first.
Yes. That's another thing. People have beliefs about something without knowing 100%
Right.
the facts. So
And
because of their beliefs, then they go, "Oh, that's not good. That's bad."
I'll say it this way, because you might be a dog trainer who's gone to the world championships of your sport or a national competition, and you might know very well a lot of the concepts that are utilized in any given system. And it doesn't have to be NePoPo. It could be the Michael Ellis system. It could be, whatever, Tar Heel or Ivan. And you might be very well versed in their style of training, but unless you've gone through the program and learned it for yourself, it's not fair to be, making statements about it. And I think, again, be more curious and less judgmental. And I think you'll be surprised at how much there really is to learn once you go through and participate in each of, or in any program that is not fully understood, or maybe you have some misunderstandings about, or maybe even just some outright concerns or complaints about. But that's what and again, like, I watched that episode like a day ago. I was like, be less judgmental and more curious. I think that's a
Yeah.
good rule of thumb for people in the dog training world.
Yeah. And don't, like, this the saying, don't knock it till you try it. And like just because maybe you don't believe in it, until you put it into practice and experiment, you actually, even if you heard people talk about it, you still don't fully understand it.
Yeah, because
Right?
internalization is a process that happens with time, right? You know,
Yeah. And that's the thing with David Poe, right? We use food, but we don't only use food. We use toys, but we don't only use toys.
well, and here's the other thing too, is like, I don't drink alcohol or wine, but like, if you press grapes into a cup and drink it immediately, it's not wine, right? It takes time to let that process like ferment and create the newer product, right? So if you just go through a school, or you just listen to someone at a seminar or something, and they've pressed the grapes for you, you've collected the juice, right? There's still more, that it's the internalization process that's required before it becomes the actual product that's going to solve your problems, or be the desired product that you're looking for, right?
Yes. And then you have to go through the process. You can't just take bits and pieces and then try to use that and say, "Oh, it doesn't work," right?
Yeah.
You have to follow the process.
And the one thing too is like, we have to be careful about biases, right? Our personal biases and like our learned biases. I think today more than ever, society and culture, we're becoming a lot more aware of bias, and I think that's good. But I think when it comes to dog training, and we're just going to keep this conversation strictly to dog training, but like, people have biases. They're like, oh, use food training, use toys only, and they've got this bias. But like, I think we need to keep ourselves in check, because at the end of the day, what happens if you get found out and you're wrong, or you get proven that you're wrong? Like, and are you going to double down? If I was to find out I was wrong
Yeah.
about something and I doubled down on it, like, that just only makes me look more of a fool. Like, so always stay curious, right? No one will ever arrive at a comprehensive knowledge of dog training, right? It's an ever growing, always evolving discipline. there's no finish line. There's no destination to get to arrive at, to say you know everything.
Yes, correct. So since we do know everything, no, just kidding.
Except on the Full Quadrant podcast, because it's the title, it's in the title, right?
So shaping versus luring.
Let's start with luring, because I think that's what is most predominant in the industry.
Well, that's what I learned first was luring, and it's very easy to start because it's just the dog is following the food.
Which, if you already haven't, if you haven't listened to episode number 3, wait, hold on, am I wrong?
It's not out.
This is 5. Episode 4 was previously.
Yeah, 4 was last. You said 3.
I'm an idiot. I announced the wrong one.
That's okay.
But so
don't double down on
it. Exactly. See, this is why it's important to be curious, because I'm like, wait a second, did I say something wrong? And episode 5 is today. This is episode 5. Episode 4, if you haven't heard episode 4, it's a lot about, we kind of talked about it, but we didn't dive into the how-tos, the pros and cons, and the secret sauce of luring, and which is what we're going to do today in episode 5.
Yep. So yeah, luring, I learned, I think everybody, even you don't have to be taught luring, because what happens is any person, even trainers, non-trainers, they have a piece of food in their hand, and right away the dog his nose is right there. So you have the dog's attention immediately, and as long as you keep that food in your hand, the dog is going to follow it, right? If it wants that food.
Yeah. And that's important, because with luring, it's required that you have a source of motivation for the dog that has enough value that the dog will be willing to find the behavior that unlocks access to that reinforcer.
Yeah. If you don't, then that's where the dog will start checking out.
Right.
If you're luring, strictly.
Right. So before we move on, I just want to talk about, so I mean, in the science, right? So that we root down into the science a little bit. There's primary reinforcers. There are secondary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers tend to be the most effective type of reinforcement or motivational source for a person or an animal, because it fills an existential need. It fills an innate drive for existence, right? So examples of a primary reinforcer are food, water, safety, reproduction, things like that. The things that you find in Maslow 1, the hierarchy of Maslow 1.
And if some people would say play, right?
So
I don't
mean,
look at it as that, because they don't need that to survive, but some people say that they do need that to survive, to be.
Like I wouldn't consider it a genetic requirement, because obviously, like, if I was not to play in my entire life, the quality of my life may not be as good, but I certainly wouldn't die because I did not play in my life.
So let me ask you this. So primary reinforcer food, but could you say that like treats are not a primary reinforcer even though they're food? Could you classify them?
No, you can't.
Secondary reinforcer.
So I guess this,
you understand what I mean?
Yeah. So I think the question, so to understand that question, the definition of a secondary reinforcer is something that's contingent on its association with another reinforcer. So in my mind, when I think about secondary reinforcers, you think about praise, recognition for doing something well, even like body language, like a pat on the back or a smile. If you wave to someone and they smile back at you, you were secondarily reinforced for waving at them, right? You didn't receive any primary reinforcement, but there was secondary reinforcement available for you waving at your neighbor as you drove home from work, or some sort of like positive feedback loop that you get presented with.
So, well, in the scientific definition,
Yeah.
what would a toy be? A ball.
You could classify, I mean, there are trainers that will go to say, oh, using a toy is substitute for satiating a prey drive, right? Where the dog hunts and chases something and then possesses it. I think that's a pseudo replacement or a pseudo substitute for satiating a prey drive. And again, I'm not a scientist. I don't have a degree in like a PhD in
But
that.
that's so the different definition, right?
Yeah, but by
This is
definition,
right. It says things that motivate behavior because they satiate an individual's basic survival needs.
right.
So, like, would you say the is like chasing prey is a survival need?
I mean, yeah, I think it can be loosely connected to it for sure, because prey drive, and like we use it in protection work or developing dogs for certain types of behaviors and obedience, or even like search and rescue style tracking. You want them to act out their hunt drives, their search drive. You want that fulfillment to come. So I do think loosely, yes, toys can become a pseudo satiator for a drive that could be potentially, tied to existential drives. I don't
But
think
it's
in and of
not.
itself, because it's even prey drive is
But then
not
no, a ball would be secondary because even in that what you're explaining, right? If the ball has to do with like prey drive, but then that would be like kind of the definition of secondary because it's associated with the primary,
yeah.
which is
I
the
mean, at
prey,
the end, like
right?
if you chase and catch a ball, you might satiate the desire to hunt and chase an object, but you don't satiate the drive of hunger. Your appetite is still there if you haven't been given food, right? And so, does it fully satisfy an existential need? Maybe we'll leave that to everyone to discuss and share their thoughts on. But I think in some cases, yes, like prey drive can be primary reinforcement by satiating that. But I think,
But it's not because it's associated with the
I
prey,
mean,
which is the primary, right? The prey is the food,
right.
correct?
Yeah.
Anyway, like instead of saying primary and secondary, we could say what something the dog needs for survival and something that he does not need for survival.
Yeah. And I only bring up the two definitions because a lot of people, like you said, using treats, are treats primary reinforcement? No, they're not, because the dog is already satiated with meal times, and then they're supplemental, they're additive on top of what is already satiating the dog's appetite on a regular basis. So they're supplemental reinforcement. They're nice to haves, but they're not necessary to have, right?
Yeah. And that's the point, right? It's not something the dog needs.
And that's why, like, you know, the conversation about, oh, dogs need emotion, right? Well, sure, like I love to emote with my dogs, but just because a training session is very quiet or focused doesn't mean I live quiet and focused with my dog 24/7. I can finish a 15-minute session where I have said or used a clicker in that session, where I'm communicating through markers with my dog, and then I can go on a hike, or I can go to the park and throw the frisbee, and I can be like, hey buddy, good job, nice job, and I can be like all sorts of talking to my dog. But just because I don't do that in my training sessions does not mean I don't have a very deep bond with my dog emotionally.
Yeah.
It's not an all or nothing, right? And that's the other thing. That's the problem with camps, is they make you blind to other things that can be good for your dog, right? Sometimes it's nice to focus on a quiet training session or a secluded training session. Like, I guarantee you, not everybody out there who's saying, oh, praise your dog this, praise your dog that. They're not going out and training in the middle of a parade because their praise has little value in the middle of a parade or a circus, right? Like if praise is such a valuable thing, and by definition, it's a secondary reinforcer, it must be tied to something else. It must have been associated with a primary reinforcer. If praise is so valuable, then it should be a bulletproof method of reinforcement under any circumstance. Am I right? Or am I wrong? Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong.
Yes. Is
Wait,
it?
yes to what? Yes, I'm right, or yes, I'm wrong?
Yes, you're right. I believe. I always go back to that. Does the dog need it to survive?
Yeah,
Right. And then people are like, oh, your dog is doing stuff just to survive. But I mean, we all do everything we do, right? That's really, really, really important is for us to survive, even people.
sure.
Because if we're looking at survival, we're not going to go and play a game. If we don't have any food in the cupboards, we're not going to go play a game.
Right. You're not going to play a game to satisfy the fact that you don't have something to eat at dinner time.
Yeah. Now, it's once we have the food in the cupboard, then the secondary thing we do is like, oh, now we have time. Let's go play.
Right.
But also the emotions, like you said, is it that strong because it's the type of dog that responds to that, or is it just because it's been conditioned, and it's just become like a reflex for the dog? That's the question.
Yeah. And the other thing that makes me, curious is when people talk about, oh, yeah, you see a dog trainer, like obviously a lot of dog trainers have higher drive animals because it's fun to play with a Ferrari. We like driving fast cars. Um, but they say, oh, well, if all you interact with is high drive dogs, then your training is, not complete, or your methods can't address a subset of the dog population that don't have the equivalent drives. And I agree that, yeah, the training might not do it or train those dogs well. But if you think about it, those dogs, I mean, not that those dogs deserve to be like out of the picture. I'm not saying that. So, not to be misunderstood here, but in nature, only the strong survive, right? Like if you took a weak dog that had no foraging or no hunting skills, like say you get separated from a dog who's extremely nervous and has only lived in an apartment on the 10th floor in New York City looking out Central Park, and every morning on the dot, or 7 a.m. on the dot, they get their delicious pre-cooked food on a silver platter, and they eat, and then they find themselves separated from you in the wild, or you're on a hike, and if they don't have the necessary wherewithal to go out and hunt for food, that dog is, it gets swallowed up by nature.
Yeah, there's a lot of dogs like that, right? And also, it's the learned like softness. But going back to the emotions, okay, are the emotions actually that
Are they
um,
the motivation for the dog? No,
rewarding to the dog,
no.
or is it because after you show the emotions is when you pull out your ball or you pull out
It's
your food?
the emotion. The emotion is what cues. The type of emotion is what cues the type of reward. So just another type of marker. Emotion is not anything more than it's a signal to the dog of what kind of consequence did the dog earn? Did it earn a positive consequence, which is a ball, toy, food, praise, happy smiles on the face? Or did your frowny face, did that earn a consequence of punishment, maybe a timeout in the kennel, a correction, punishment, something like that, a loss of opportunity? It's all it is its emotion is strictly a
Like you
bridge.
said, it's a cue, it's a
It's a
signal.
cue, it's a signal that bridges the dog's understanding about what is about to happen. And that's why the dog its tail starts wagging, right? Because
Yeah.
again, the reason and the ultimate proof that puts this to rest in my mind is I get a phone call maybe like a couple months ago, and they're like, hey, my beloved dog of 3 years, sweetest dog ever, never hurt a soul. Something happened and that dog bit their child, right? And they're like, this dog loves, like, sleeps in the bed with my child, does this, that, and the other. And we give it so much praise. They said that phrase. We give it so much praise. It has so many nice things, so many toys, and it still bit their child,
Because it
right?
loves it, the child, so much.
Yes, because if emotion was such a valuable thing to a dog, it would have rooted out all of the animosity, all the bad feelings in that dog. It would have been replaced with the love, the smiles, the popcorn, rainbows, and unicorns, right?
Also, you can prove it because you can, if you come out very happy and praising your dog and then
Punish
you
it.
whack it with a stick, right? It's not going to like you being happy
Yeah.
because it leads to something. And that's the thing. It's like the emotions, because your emotions lead to something good, it's why the dog reacts to your emotions. If your emotions, happy emotions led to something bad, then the dog would react differently to your happy emotions. It's
Here's
just
another,
what comes after, right?
yeah. Here's another example that kind of puts this into perspective. You take a dog from a foreign country, a lot of, let's talk Europe, right? We import a European dog that has grown up in an environment where a foreign language is spoken: German, Czech, French, Dutch, whatever, right? Maybe they haven't been exposed to English, right? The dog comes over having been trained, maybe let's say it's a 2-year-old dog. It's only ever heard Czech in its life. Comes over to the US, someone bought the dog, wants it to be their sport dog or a personal protection dog. They start playing with it and they only know English. Good boy. How fast does that dog pick up on that? Right? It's not because the dog understands English and he learned English in 2 seconds after getting off the plane. It's he started to form associations. Dogs learn through associative learning. They make paired connections to, okay, when he does this, this is the outcome. When he does that, that's the outcome, right? And they learn to avoid the bad and draw towards the good. We want to think our dogs are like, yeah, maybe they are emotional, but I love my dog because he's not a human. I love him because he's an animal that, like, finds value hanging out with a different species altogether, right? I don't want another, I don't need my dog to be another human. I'm not trying to make him out to be that.
Yeah. But also I think it's the facial and body expressions are what the dog is cueing off of first. And because your emotions dictate that also, it's like there's a combination,
Right.
right?
And
You
even
understand what I mean?
I mean, even as much to say your chemical levels, your pheromones, your stress chemicals, or your adrenaline chemicals, they're probably queuing off of that as well.
But it always leads to what happens after.
It has, that's the only way they learn, is by consequence. They can't learn in advance of a consequence, right? The consequence must be tied, and that's part of the thing is with reinforcement, there are there's an element of contingency that's required for learning to take place. Contingency means that the behavior elicits a specific response, and as long as that response is consistent, the dog will form an opinion about that behavior, right?
Yeah.
So it's a correlation between behavior and its consequence, which informs the behavior of the dog in the future. But you can't inform future behavior without an experience, right? The dog has to cross a line and learn that, oh, doing this brought me an unwanted consequence, or doing that brought me a desirable consequence, before they start directing their behavior in the future.
Mm-hmm.
We can't logic our way by, okay, buddy, next, you've never done this before, but I don't want you to touch the hot stove. I want you to walk over and sit on your place cot, right? Experiential learning, associative learning must take place with a dog in order for them to make that association and choose for themselves in the future.
But even for humans, right? Because anybody who has kids will say, how many times have you told your kid that if they do something, it's going to hurt them?
Right.
They still go and do it, right?
So my son, I've got a son who's turning 3. His name is Evan, and he's the kind of kid who has to learn on his own. Like I've got other kids who are they're going to be a lot more receptive to my instruction or my guidance, and they'll be like, okay, dad, and they'll just kind of run with it. But Evan, he like you can tell him don't do this, and he's gonna do it right away. And then he's gonna be like, ow. And I remember I'm like, don't touch the waffle iron. It's hot. And he touched it. And he's like, he said, ow. And I'm like, I told you. He's like, ow. And I'm like, he's just the kind of kid that has to learn through experience. And now I just stopped telling him not to do certain things because I'm like, as long as he's not going to kill himself, I let him learn on his own because it saves the frustration on my end because it allows him to learn it on his own.
Yes.
It's a very funny example, but
you remember that you will remember that more if you learn on your own, right? Than if you just don't do it because somebody told you.
yeah.
Because you still don't know what the consequence is. If someone tells you that if you touch that, it's going to burn you, you don't have full understanding of what that means. You know it's not good, but until you touch it and burn yourself, you don't know the full consequence of that.
And it's just like you said in one of our other episodes, you talked about when you broke your knee because the dog ran into you, and you don't remember the pain. You just remember it's something you don't want to experience ever again.
Yes. I can't, yeah, I could, right now, for that particular thing, I cannot describe what the pain was like. I
But the
can't.
memory of it, the memory of the experience is enough to make sure that you do everything in your power to make sure that you stay safe and don't repeat that incident again.
Correct.
It's a funny thing, memory and
Yeah.
what we carry over from pain. But not to get off into the weeds, back to luring.
I think we already got off into the weeds.
But back to luring, right? So talk about some of the benefits of luring, right? Like why, so we started out talking about let's talk about why it's good, why it's good for dogs.
So luring is it, you can implement it quickly, right away. Like we said, you get a dog, a puppy, a dog, anything, and you have food in your hand, the dog is going to start following you.
Yeah.
So immediately you can start manipulating their body, right? If you control their head, you control their body.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can immediately start moving them into positions. You can lure them onto things. You can lure them into the down. You can lure them into a sit. You can lure them into the heel position if we're talking about positions. You can lure them onto a box. You can lure them through something, right? So immediately that you get the response from the dog. The problem is the dog is not thinking about what it's doing. It's just following the food.
It's puppet training, right? Because you're controlling, right? And you control your movement controls the movement of the dog. It's not the dog innately controlling its own movement. It's the dog is following, and whatever you're doing is actually creating the formative behavior in the dog, at which point it gets marked and released for reward.
And that is where if you don't have the lure, the dog doesn't do the behavior.
So as you were talking, I think it's important that we define, and again, for people that are planning on going to the schools at NePoPo or that are considering like modern dog training, one of the concepts that is discussed in fairly good detail, but warrants another shout out here in the conversation about luring and shaping, is the process of luring is a method of rewarding your dog directly. It's a direct reward methodology, right?
Yep. Yeah. And what does that mean? Direct reward. Direct reward means that the pursuit of the reward is what brings on the behavior. The dog's focus is on the reward, and that's why the behavior happens.
Correct. The behavior is formed by the reward.
Correct. As opposed to shaping, where the dog's focus is not on the reward directly.
It's focused on a behavior.
It's focused on the behavior that brings on the reward.
Yeah. Yep. So direct reward brings about the behavior. Indirect or shaping behavior brings about the reward.
Correct. And what is in luring with a direct reward, the dog is not thinking about the behavior.
No, they're thinking about
just
the finish line.
Thinking about getting the reward,
Yep.
right? Whereas in shaping, the dog is thinking about what behavior can get the reward. Right. So the thing with luring is this, and that's why I think even if you lure, you should shape, and not necessarily shaping a specific behavior, but teaching the dog what shaping does for me is teaches the dog to problem solve, right? So in luring, if you teach shaping, even if you're going to do luring, if you teach shaping, you will be able to fade the lure faster.
Yes.
Because the dog is a problem solver, and that's what fading the lure is the dog is trying to figure out how to get that reward without directly following the lure, because you're fading it out. You're not, it's not no longer following it.
Right.
And what does that mean? Like, so going back, when you're teaching luring, in the beginning, the dog's nose is right on the reward. And usually it's with food, right? So the dog's nose is right on the food and it's following it and goes into behavior, whatever it is. Now you have to get your dog doing the behavior without its nose right on the food. And that's what fading the lure is. But what happens is the dog, you have to be good at doing that, right? You have to be good at fading the lure so that the dog still does the behavior you want in the correctly, right? The precision, without having to have it directly touching the lure. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One thing to note. So I was just running into this. We had our Schutzen Club training this past weekend, and a lot of the dogs that we're training, we're doing send away work right now because some of the dogs are getting ready to do their 1s and 2s. And the way we train the send away is we started it out with luring, where we kind of had a toy or some food, and we showed the dog to run to a stake or a pole in the ground and run around it, and then come back to us, and then we gradually get further and further away from that. And
did you initially lure them around the pole?
Yes. So okay. we would like, we started really close to the pole. We'd use our hand, they'd follow the hand and go around, and then we'd mark and pay. And then we started gradually getting further away, and we would have to fade the lure. But we started out luring it so that they had to follow the reward, the ball, the toy on a string, whatever it was. But the thing that I was confronted with is someone wanted to shape that. And so they just shaped it where they let the dog figure out, oh, going around the pole has a reward. Something interesting about that is that in luring or direct reward, going to the behavior, the target or the cued behavior is very fast. The way back is not as fast. In indirect reward, going to the target or cued behavior is not so fast, but on the way back from the target or cued behavior after completion is much faster, right? And so there are some benefits to why you'd want to choose a lure, a shape, or a shaped behavior, because they're going to give you speed in different halves of either before the behavior or after the behavior, right?
Yeah.
Because like now, so with one of the dogs, we're trying to increase speed to the send away pole. And now instead of having, because that dog was shaped and it was a little slow, but on the way back, you get you hear the mark or the release cue, they fly back. And we're trying to, so we know they're capable of running fast. We're just trying to switch the speed in which they go out to the thing. So we're using more direct reward. Yeah.
But with the shaping, that dog is going slow to the pole and then fast
back. Yep. It happens with dumbbells too. If you do it with dumbbells, a dog that's used direct reward will be fast to the dumbbell, slow back. But if you use indirect reward, the dog is usually slow to the dumbbell, but very fast on the way back.
Yeah. So have you tried clicking on the way to the pole?
Yes. But you have to be
Rewarding.
careful because otherwise the dog gets to that certain point and then they turn around and look and wait for the click, but they don't hear it. So you can use the GPS waypoint system and click at random points along the way to reward good speed. And you would only want to click when they're running fast like you want them to. You're not just going to click because they're on their way there. Maybe in the beginning to start them off, you might do that to teach them like, hey, there could be a potential for reward here. But yeah.
Yeah. But you would do the opposite. You give a low value reward if you clicked on the way there.
Or you click and then toss the reward where they're at.
Yeah. There's a lot of different things.
This is why luring and shaping is very difficult, because there's, even within one method or approach to teaching a behavior, there are a lot of it's a spider web application.
I think that comes down to the dog, right? The speed going out and coming back. I think sometimes it comes down to the dog, where you can't say, okay, which goes back to what we were saying. You can't say, I'm only going to lure this, or I'm only going to shape this, right? You have to be able to do both. You have to kind of start with one and see, okay, my dog is slow going out. Maybe I need to change to more of a direct reward.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where you can't have, like what we said, you can't be in one camp and only do one thing.
Because there are some benefits that can only be found in the other side, right? And so like in direct or luring, motivation is very high. The dog is very motivated, but when motivation is high, concentration is very low, right? And so, but if you go into shaping or indirect reward, you swap and you have lower motivation, but you have higher concentration.
Yep, correct. So luring. What is the other thing with luring? Luring, it's easier to get precision, I would say, but
it is easier. Yes, it's not impossible with shaping. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult and it's a little bit more involved.
So and by precision, I mean like more difficult things, more complicated behaviors,
like technically correct movements, biomechanics of the dog.
Yeah,
yeah.
Because with shaping, you have to have good timing to capture the precision,
right?
And it, like a down, it's not. The precision is different than the head position in something. But I can tell you this, I lured my old Doberman. I lured the heel on the left and I shaped the heel on the right.
Which one was better?
The shaped one was better. And it goes to the dog. That was the thing, what you're talking about. And I didn't start with her. I started luring because that's the first thing I learned. She was older when I started the free shaping.
Well, and that's with people too, right? Because some students, they're like, oh, don't tell me the answer. They want to think it through and work it out themselves. And then other people are like, hey, all right, just show me where I did my math wrong and let me rework it again and give me a new set of numbers to work, but show me where I went wrong, right? Some people are just, they bias one direction over the other. Same with dogs, right? Some dogs might lean like more.
It goes to frustration, right? The dogs that frustrate easily and quickly, that's where I would do more luring with those dogs, because they need to be shown what to do. Because their frustration, there's some frustration that leads to the dog like concentrating more, and there's other frustration where the dog is just like, I can't do this, right? So that's where luring for those dogs that frustrate, and when I say frustrate easily, it means they ramp up quickly, and they need the luring because they need to be shown what to do. But shaping helps that too, like I said before, because it makes them creative. Like you see, like Tan, he's very creative, but he frustrates easily. So you can do, I do shaping just for creativity, and I'll do a little shaping for behaviors, but then I will go to luring pretty quickly with him because he's just like, show me what to do. I don't want to figure it out.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes to say like luring is part of a classical conditioning model of training, right? Because it's the pairing of cues. It's an association of doing one thing opens the door for this other thing. The one thing I will say, and this is a thought that occurred early on in our conversation, and so I don't mean this to be a walking back in our conversation, but when you train a dog with emotion and you talk about training the dog for, the dog should be trained to bond with you. We want the dog to bond with you, but if that's the only thing that the dog is training for, like say if you're a dog trainer, you take a client's dog and you're wonderful at building a good bond, but then that owner doesn't develop that bond with that dog will only be trained when you're there. It doesn't go back to the owner if the owner can't, unless the owner is willing to put in the time and effort to create a bond equally with that dog will not be a trained dog. But if you train the dog to love behavior and not the emotion of the owner or the handler, then the dog can go to anybody and it'll still do behavior because it loves the behavior, right? And that's the value of why, like, so knocking some trainers for not being emotional, like I don't take umbrage, but I definitely have I disagree with that because like maybe with your personal dogs, sure, have a great bond. But if you're in the profession of training dogs for other people and you only rely on bonding with your dog to train that dog, then you're not going to be able to do a lot of good for the dog and their owner when they go back home after training, because the dog is only doing something out of love for you, the person that you are, or the person that you are with that dog, rather than teaching the dog to love doing behavior for the sake of behavior's sake.
That's it.
It's got to be that way, man. It's got to
So
be
that's
that way.
why I think I would rather have, personally, I'd rather have the dog that is working because it loves the behavior
Yep.
and not working because of maybe it wants to please you.
Yeah, because what
Right?
happens on the day that it decides it doesn't want to please you, right?
Yeah. But also going to the pet dogs, what if you have a client that's not very emotional?
Yeah. It's the same thing.
Right? Now the dog is like, oh, I don't like my owner because whatever.
What if
He
their
can't
owner's
play
in a
with me.
wheelchair?
Maybe he can't play.
What
Yeah.
if the owner's in a wheelchair and can't get up and do a chicken dance every time their dog does something good? Right?
Chicken dance.
I think even talking about the unfortunate nature of like how some people call shapers like chicken trainers, where they're shaping their dogs like chickens, you know, I think it's important to talk about like, hey, just because you shape doesn't mean that's how you live your entire life with your dog. Like a training session might be shaping for 15 minutes, and then you might go on a hike with your dog and be talking to your dog as you run up a mountain, right? Like
It goes to the same thing as when people sit like, don't use food,
yeah.
right? Or don't use toys or anything. It's why limit yourself
Yep.
to one thing. Okay. But also it's wrong. Because if I say in an angry tone,
I got you
right?
pissed off.
If I say in an angry tone,
I can already tell we're gonna have an amazing conversation because you're pissed.
but that's the point. If I say in an angry tone, I love you, but in an angry tone,
I know exactly. I can turn a good boy into a very negative thing.
it has nothing to do with you speaking to the dog.
I know, dude. Like you can say good boy. I can associate good boy with heavy stim and turn good boy into the most destructive word they ever heard in their life. But like it's a fundamental understanding and it is anthropomorphic.
But that's the thing. If it's only about play, then if the person can't play, or if they can't play as well as you,
It doesn't
they're not
transfer.
going to want
It's
to do the behavior.
non-transferable dog training. Be a transferable dog trainer, not a non-transferable dog trainer.
Yeah. But also that's where, like in NePoPo, where Bart says, like, if a NePoPo trained dog, anybody that understands the language of NePoPo can take that dog and work with it.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not, because if you train a dog with your emotion and I don't show as much emotion, dog is not going to perform the same way. But if the dog is doing it for the behavior, because it loves the behavior, then it's waiting for anybody to tell it to down.
Yes.
Right? Not just its owner.
Right.
It's waiting for anybody. And it's waiting for that down, and it does it with the same heart and soul as if you said it, or if I said it, or if somebody else said it.
I love that we're on this part right now, because
we have two different podcasts going on.
Yes, but that's why it's the full quadrant. It's always going to be full quadrant when you come onto our podcast. No. So I was on a Facebook group thread, and this was right around the time that stick hits got axed from the sport, and there was a lot of contention about, oh, the sport's being watered down, and some people were saying, well, it's not being watered down. You can still provide pressure. And someone made a very interesting suggestion. It was probably, in the last 5 years, it was the most interesting suggestion I've ever seen about how to make dog training or dog sport more interesting and more difficult, and really show the quality of the training, not the quality of the relationship of the dog with the owner. Okay. And what they said was this. And this gentleman said, and I messaged him after, I'm like, hey, this was the most brilliant thing I've heard on social media in probably like 5 years. And I messaged him, and he had said, why don't we have a situation where everyone, and this was in an IGP forum, and why don't we have a situation where people take their dogs to trial, and instead of being the one to trial their own dog, their dog has to trial with a different handler. Same routine, the IGP3 routine or the 1 or the 2, but they have to trial at the hands of a different handler. And now we'll really see if the dog is able to perform behavior. And I thought that is so interesting.
That reminds me.
Because now you're testing the actual love of the dog doing the behavior, and not just the love of the dog doing behavior for the owner. Because, and the guy got, he was mobbed like socially on that platform. Too. They're like, oh, I would never want my dog to do that because my dog only works for me. My dog only works for the bond. And I'm like, dude, I'm 100%. He actually ended up having to delete that post because there was so much hate for the fact that he suggested that someone else might handle your dog to see if that dog can perform at the same level he would with you. Yes. Most interesting post I've ever seen on a dog.
That's awesome. So I thought about that too, and also I was going to say to you, like, a concept for, because you have a team of trainers, like proofing the dog, like, because you have 5 trainers and you have 5 board and trains.
Yep.
That at some point, all the trainers should switch dogs.
Okay. So we do. Right? We do. We have field trips every week where we go and we hand off dogs to other trainers. And I'll take a dog from one of the trainers who I've never seen or had a relationship with, and I will be able to walk healing with this dog, heads up focused down the mall, down Home Depot, the sporting goods stores. And I'll know if this dog is going to go home well trained or not, because if I can ask for the same behaviors from this dog, where I have no history of reinforcement to this dog, but if they still offer behavior, I know that dog is ready to go home. So we do that every week.
Because the reinforcement comes from the behavior.
Yep.
Not from you.
Yes.
That's the point. That's the point of NePoPo for me.
Yeah.
Right? Is the behavior is the reward.
What?
Not the person doing it or giving the command. It's
lest we draw attention from the same people who wanted to mob this guy for saying that someone else should trial the dog for you. Lest we say that by training this way in NePoPo, you also afford yourself the opportunity to bond deeper with your dog emotionally. because you by a dog performing on cue with heart and soul because he loves the behavior, that does not exclude you from bonding with them emotionally. In fact, you have greater ability to bond with them emotionally because now you nag them less. They make you happier. They listen quicker. They listen faster. They perform better. If a dog that does that is going to be treated far better than a dog you have to nag, that you have to bribe, that you have to bait into doing behaviors. I promise you 100%.
That's the thing. It's like the relationship comes
After they have
right
trust.
after the respect, right? And respect doesn't mean you have to do everything I say, right? It's just that you gain respect by the dog understanding your communication and understanding, like, again, this is, I like doing this stuff, and this person is the person I do it with. Instead of, yeah, instead of going like, I like being with you, and then, oh, we play.
We
Or we do
handicap the dog by not expecting them to overcome adversity in their life to learn how to find comfort. If all we do is rah the dog and they've never learned to, like if we only emotionally train our dogs, we handicap them. That is their limit. That is the only thing that motivates them. But what happens when someone is unable to emotionally motivate that dog? Rather than calling that person a bad trainer, right? We should have prepared the dog for the time that they might not be around someone who can emotionally tap into the dog, and teach the dog that there's still advantage in being obedient to someone because that could save that dog's life, right? What happens when your dog gets lost? Maybe you have a reactive Malinois or a Shepherd or whatever, and your dog somehow gets out, right? Maybe you have a kid that leaves the door open, the wind breaks the lock on the gate, and you're not in your neighborhood or your fenced yard, and the dog gets out, and animal control has to approach it to try to save it from running into a street, or someone else tries to stop it because they see it in another part of the neighborhood. If they can't tell your dog to sit or verbally communicate to your dog something that is going to save its life without pumping it up, and they're not going to know they need to sweet talk the dog and whisper sweet nothings into its ear before it's going to let them approach, right? You have handicapped your dog in its life, and
Yep.
it's at a disadvantage for living.
Yep.
But again, lest we be misconstrued here, we're not saying don't bond with your dog. We're saying deeper emotional bonding is possible through this type of training.
Yeah. And why can't you have the bond outside of training?
Right.
Right? Why does it have to be with the training?
So that being said, shaping.
Shaping, taking all the emotion out of dog training. No.
It's a perfect segue. Let's go to shaping.
And shaping is, you have to, again, I mean, with luring and shaping, you have to have something that motivates the dog, right? It's something they want. And again, food is the easiest way, because food, you can have little pieces of food, and you can reset right away. You can go again. But the dog in shaping is trying, and then it's trying to figure out the behavior that will get them their reward, right? On its own. And then, as anybody knows, when you try to figure out something and you finally do, it's much stronger learning than when you're shown something, right? You remember it more. And the one example that we always use is the GPS, right, in the car. When before you had GPS and you had to find your way to a friend's house for the first time, right? Maybe you got lost, maybe it took you a while, but after the second time, or maybe the third time, you remember how to get there. Whereas with the GPS, if you're always relying on the GPS on how to get there, it will take you a long time to learn it if the GPS is there, because you're relying on that help. And that's what shaping is less help, right? The dog figures it out. But at the same time, that's why I call shaping learning how to learn.
I
Right?
like that.
Because the dog is it's becoming creative. It's trying to figure stuff out by making mistakes, right? Because they try stuff out. Now, there's different ways, you know, there's free shaping with only positive reinforcement, like popo shaping, right? There's NePo shaping, only using negative reinforcement. But if you really want precision, that's when you do the NePoPo shaping, right? Where you
Yep.
negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. And we showed that in our school,
Yeah.
right? When you and I did the NePoPo shaping with an e-collar and a clicker, and you were able to do a very, not very, but it was a complicated behavior,
Right.
right? By me not speaking,
Yep.
but only using the two tools to guide you to do the correct thing.
I should have taken a picture. I should have taken a picture of that and sold that, because that was a Picasso.
Well, nowadays, man, you could sell anything. It's sales is not about what the thing is worth. It's about what someone's willing to pay
Well,
for it.
I mean, have you seen, there's a guy on YouTube called Mr. Doodle. He sells doodle art for like millions of dollars and people buy it.
That's awesome.
It's
Hey, if
crazy.
you want, if you want to pay for it, that's fine. That's you, right?
But
Who are we
with
to judge? That goes to back. Who are we to judge what is good or bad?
yeah, be curious
Right?
about it. Like, why would
Yeah.
someone want to pay that much money, right? Like, what? Well, maybe you're not catching on. Maybe you should be buying $1 million worth of doodle art from Mr. Doodle,
Yeah.
right?
If you can buy it for $1 million and sell it for $2 million, then it's valuable.
Right. And shaping's all about the reinforcement, like rewarding successive approximations of a desired behavior, right? Like letting the dog get closer and closer to the behavior and rewarding those miniature steps towards that finished outcome, right? Crossing that finish line still gets reinforcement as you get closer. That's
Yeah.
that's the essence of shaping.
Yeah. And manipulating the environment so that the dog figures out what you want, right?
And a lot of the criticisms from people that lure say that shaping can't be fast. Well, yeah,
Actually, it is.
what so yes, it can be if you know how to do it right. So let's break down some secret sauce about shaping. How tell like I mean, how can you increase or influence the speed of which you shape a behavior? How can you influence that speed?
So first is you would what we call in NePoPo the aquarium, right? You would make your aquarium or the area that's available to the dog to figure out something, you make it small. And if you really want to make it quick, you would make the only thing it can interact with is the thing you're trying to teach, right? Because think of a small room with nothing inside it other than a platform, or a football field that's open with a lot of things on the football field and then one platform that you want the dog to get onto. So if there's a lot of stuff for the dog to interact with, now it's going to take longer because they're going to start interacting with different things, especially if you're only doing positive reinforcement, right? Free shaping. Because you can only, with positive reinforcement only free shaping, you can only reward the good intentions. You can't show them when they're wrong.
Right.
Right. But if you create, like, you have a room with nothing inside it, and then you put a dumbbell in the middle of the room, now there's one point of interest for the dog. So you can quickly shape them to that point of interest. But if that's where I said, like, again, positive reinforcement only shaping, you're going to have to make the criteria small. Or I would say negative reinforcement only, you will probably have to make the criteria small. But if you use like NePoPo shaping, which is a combination of the two, because you can show the dog when it's wrong, that is the fastest way to teaching a behavior when you're shaping.
Yeah. So what I take from that, and just to recap, ways to influence the rate of learning in shaping is controlling the environment, setting your environment up so that there are fewer variables, eliminating wasted energy, wasted motion, wasted thought process, wasted curiosity, and it's more channeled in the dog's behavior. There's less for the dog to think about, and it's only one thing to do. So smaller aquariums, equipment can help with certain behaviors,
which is
flat
more help.
boards, yeah, environmental help, instrumental learning is what they call it, right? Because it, depends on, instruments of the environment, and timing, right? Chunking, doing smaller rewards along the way, your timing,
Yep.
that all, I mean, there are some graduates from the system that shape faster than most people can lure a behavior, right? I'm thinking of like Canine Coach over in the UK. They do great work luring behavior, or sorry, not luring, but shaping behaviors in an extremely quick and fast time frame.
Yeah. But shaping the the motivation for the reward is what can lead to faster shaping also, right?
Yeah.
If you're using existential food as opposed to treat training will bring that more motivation for the dog to want to figure out what it is.
So in all of this conversation about shaping, I think there's also a need to address, there's two types of ways that we shape a behavior, right? There's and it's all included under the umbrella of what we call chaining, right? So we either forward chain behaviors or we backward chain a behavior, right? So what I mean by that, an example of backward chaining a behavior is like you teach the behavior that the dog, or the aspect of the behavior that the dog must do at the very end first. So for example, if you're teaching a dumbbell retrieve, you're going to teach the dog to hold the dumbbell, because the final picture of the dog is the dog in front of you holding the dumbbell. So you would teach that picture first. And then you would teach the dog to pick the dumbbell up. And then you would teach the dog to run to the dumbbell. And then once the dog has all of those pieces built together, then you can start throwing it, and then the dog runs and does it. But it was taught in a backwards or a reverse engineered sequence.
Reverse order.
Yeah, reverse order, but they call it back chaining, right? Backwards chaining. Forward chaining, and this is done because we shape either forward chaining or we backward chain behaviors. And forward chaining is like footstep tracking, right? You teach the dog to go from one footstep to the next sequentially, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? So you teach it in a sequential order, starting at the beginning and going down the road.
Well, we can use the dumbbell retrieve to show that too, right? So instead of the end behavior, which is holding the dumbbell right in front of you, like if you're just straight free shaping, you could teach the dog to shape to go to the dumbbell, right? So you would teach it in the correct order. You can free shape it, which means you go to the dumbbell and then you pick it up, and then you come back to me, and then you sit, right? So you can free shape that as opposed to free shaping holding the dumbbell right in front of you. Then free shaping, just one thing would be like free shaping, picking it up, right? Then picking it up and coming to you. Then it would be going out, picking it up, and then going out, picking it up, coming to you.
Yes, you can do it that way, but in my experience, and this is my personal opinion, and it's time for me to be curious of that. But for me, I've found more success in a back chaining process where there are multiple complicated steps where qualitative performance matters, right? Because otherwise, like in back chaining, you start with the end in mind, and the dog understands that the final picture is really what's going to unlock the reward, right?
Yeah.
And then it becomes that sequence. And so the dog, even though like I teach the dog the final picture and then I show him the middle picture, he's not going to be satisfied with the middle picture until he gets back into the final picture. And that's why back chaining becomes powerful, is because it does give the dog motivation to complete the picture, rather than if you forward chain it, they might run and grab it, and then they might look at you, and then there might be some thinking. It's like, oh, I've just run into, and maybe it's me. Again, I'm going to try to be open-minded here, but maybe it's me. But I found specifically with more complicated or complex behaviors and tasks, that back chaining tends to work a little bit better for the dog.
Yeah. I think it's whatever you're better at.
Maybe my next dog, I'll try forward chaining the retrieve and see how it goes.
Then if you do that, but you say you free shape the holding in front of you,
Sure.
and on another session, instead of going in order, right? You do the pieces. So you free shape holding in front of you, and then separately you go free shape running out to the dumbbell.
I just thought of
Right?
this. Think
So you're
about
going
how
both
much.
at this, huh?
Oh, go ahead, finish.
So you're going parallel, right? You're teaching back chaining and forward chaining at the same time in different sessions. You understand what I mean?
Yeah. So I just had this thought. I mean, this is why shaping is good for behaviors, because it allows you to train behaviors in indirect reward. How would you lure a retrieve of the dumbbell, right? Like drag a line with food to the dumbbell, mark and pay when the dog got to the dumbbell and touched it. Like that would be so much physical work. That would be quite laborious. You know what I'm saying? Like the benefits of shaping are that, right? You don't have to be as involved physically to teach the dog behavior, right?
Yep.
Less mechanical influence from the handler on the dog to get the behavior to take place.
It was just like there was a video. I've only seen one video like that. It didn't have to do with free shaping, but it was an agility course, but the person was sitting in a chair and was guiding its dog around the agility course while he was sitting in the chair, and the dog was doing the agility course, right? Normal agility, which kind of goes to what you said. Like if you're free shaping, you can sit in a chair and let the dog figure it out with your guidance.
Here's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see, those like the tennis referees that sit in those chairs at the tennis net, right? They've got these little tower chairs that they sit on. They're like 8 feet tall, 10 feet tall. I'd like to see someone on one of those chairs on a little tower in the middle of a agility ring, not doing anything but showing their dog where to go using a laser. I wonder how much faster a dog could do agility being guided by a laser rather than waiting for their owner. Now, granted, a lot of dogs learn the routine, they learn the pattern, but when a pattern is not available and there has to be like you have to do certain things, I'm curious if the handler being removed from the picture and just going strictly to luring with the laser, if that would create a faster dog.
I don't know like agility, but is this pattern always the same, or does it change every time?
I can't speak to that. I would guess that it changes, but I can't speak to it. I think what I know of it, I think there's a walkthrough. Like I think the judge of the day of the trial will meet with the handlers and walk you through the pattern of the course.
Are there any free shaping competitions?
You should start one.
Free shaping world championships.
We should host that on the Full Quadrant podcast.
Is there free shaping competitions? I don't see anything that says there's games and stuff.
So to recap some of the important points and variables that affect reinforcement, right? Whether you're shaping or whether you're luring, right? And understand that there are good and bad things of both. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's one is more right for a certain dog or a certain training outcome or a certain client, right? Or a certain environment. And think of it that way. Think of it less on like, oh, luring's better than shaping or shaping's better than luring. Don't think of it that way. Think about one is more appropriate given the context of what you need to do with the dog in front of you. And understand that there are variables that affect reinforcement. The first one being the contingency. Does a specific behavior correlate with a certain outcome? And does the dog understand that correlation? Because without that, reinforcement becomes weak. Another thing is, what is the gap between the delivery of the reinforcement and the trigger or the event that triggers the reinforcement, right? typically speaking, the faster or the more connected the behavior is to the consequence, the stronger the reinforcement is, right?
Yeah.
And then there's like economics to reward, right? There's value in the quality of the reward. How much quantity? Like, is it a capitalistic style of reinforcement? Are you giving more for a good job and less for a lesser job?
I just thought of something like, what do you hear from people that go to competition? What do you hear all the time? The dog was queuing off of me. Like I was nervous.
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling bad, blah, 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 right? So they explained their performance of their dog because of how they were feeling, right? But if the dog is like, I don't care how you feel, I just want to do this behavior.
Yeah.
If you're happy, sad, mad, it doesn't matter. It's like, hey, just tell me to sit. Just tell me to down. So would it be beneficial to not train with emotion if you're going to competition? Because no matter how you feel during competition, the dog is not going to be, oh,
they can't be a recipient of it, because you can't say good boy every time you get
because now
front.
You have to control your emotions, because what if you make a mistake or your dog makes a mistake and you immediately, your emotions come through, right? And now the dog feels it. Now that affects the rest of your competition.
Well, yeah, exactly. And think of it this way, right? On one hand, people are saying, oh, you need to be emotional with your dog. But then on the same hand, those same people, those same sports people are saying, oh, train like you trial. Right? Train like you trial. So they're at odds with each other. If you're going to be emotional in your training and then you go to trial, like, you would be better off trialing, right? I mean, that's just an observation. Like, I'm curious, I'm being curious here. Why can you say be emotional, but then you have to go to trial and you're like, like, it's just, I'm curious. Not judgmental, just curious.
Yeah. Not judgmental. Stop judging. Knut Fuchs, he talked about one time, he had like a perfect trial going or routine, and his emotion caused him to lose points because out of his emotion, he did his, like, some hand gesture or something, and it caused the dog to come get out and run to him, like became like a recall.
Like broke a long down or something like that.
It was, I don't remember I don't know if it was on the send out, something where the dog was in a down at a distance. I think it was like a send out.
Okay.
And he did his arms because he was happy the dog did like a perfect thing.
Right.
His emotions came through and he did something with his arms and it caused the dog to get up and run to him.
Uh-huh.
Because in training, that's what he would do.
Right.
Like, yeah, like, when you go, hey, good boy, and you put your arms out.
Right.
He did something like that, and his dog broke the down or came to him, and it cost him points.
Because the cue of the hands being excited was the cue that, hey, you come back to me for reward at that point.
Yeah. I can't, like, that. It was years ago that I heard him say that. So
yeah. So to recap, I think we touched a lot on shaping and operant conditioning a little bit.
We did more of emotions than we did on shaping and learning.
It's okay, because I think it's a precursor to those conversations, because I mean, like, in shaping, you have to be quiet, right? You can reward with emotion in shaping if the marker happens and then the delivery is the emotion. You can still use emotion in your training, but there's an order of operations. There's a sequence in which it's at an appropriate time.
So instead of the marker and the emotion being one, have the marker
follow it by the emotion.
You could follow by the emotion.
Right. If emotion is really, as you say it is, as a true reinforcer, then it should still work. But if you start to see, if you mark it with a clicker and then emote, and the dog's behavior starts to tank, then you're going to learn that your emotion doesn't have the value that you think or that you want it to have with your dog. And now we're really being honest, because now the dog is telling us what is truly reinforcing to the dog. Because at the end of the day, again, we said this in other podcasts, who are we to tell the dog what must be reinforcing to him? Like, why should I say if I want my dog to like accept my emotion, but that doesn't elicit an emotional or a reinforcing response in the dog, why don't we just use what the dog finds reinforcing?
But also, what people say, like, "Oh, I want my dog to want to be with me." It's implying that a person that doesn't train with emotion, the dog doesn't want to be with them
I
when
know,
there's no tools on.
I know.
A good trainer is a good trainer.
Can we be less judgmental of people who that train differently with good outcomes? Like that's what I want to see, is like, if you train with good outcomes and they train differently, can we be less judgmental and less critical of those people and just be like, wow, that's good training?
Yeah, it goes to the same when people say e-collar or no e-collar, right? The whole thing is, if you take we take everything off the dog, a dog that's trained with e-collar and a dog that's trained without an e-collar. If we take everything off, no reinforcers, no tools, nothing. If you cannot tell how that dog was trained, then what's wrong with the training, right?
Yeah.
Because a person that trained with emotion or without emotion, they can take, if their training's correct, they can take all the tools off their dog and the dog will still listen,
Yeah.
right? Not
That's
because
this is a podcast that we have in queue for another week. This is going to be another podcast. I'm really looking forward to that one. That one's going to be a lot of fun.
yeah, cool. We kind of went all over the place.
No, I think it's all related. I think it's all related. I think the buildup happened. The buildup was necessary to set the stage for why luring and shaping are interwoven with each other, or can be, and should not be compartmentalized and made out to be their own tribes or camps.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the, for me, I think that was a powerful point to get across, you know.
it's use, don't limit yourself by one or the other, right? Use whatever you
Again,
need at the
if
time.
the dog looks good with one or the other, like, who are
But
we to
personally,
tell
I
the dog?
think, yeah, personally, I think your luring will be better if you teach free shaping.
Yes, I agree with that.